What if a band famous for its perfect harmonies ended up so divided its members refused to even breathe the same air? What if three voices that once blended with flawless precision became three enemies separated by tour managers, floor assignments, and even designated elevators? Three Dog Night sold more records than the Beatles during their peak years, delivered 21 straight top 40 hits, and filled American airwaves with some of the most joyful music of the era. Yet behind those harmonies was a darkness powerful enough to consume them from the inside. One singer burned through $20,000 a week on heroin. Another refused to travel with his own bandmates, and decades later, even after sobriety, even after reflection, they still cannot stand in the same room together. This is the story of how America's greatest harmony band destroyed itself from within. Three Dog Night did not just rise, they erupted across American radio with a force so overwhelming that the country could not escape them. Their songs appeared in diners, gymnasiums, car radios, and television specials. They could transform obscure compositions by overlooked songwriters into towering cultural moments. They became a soundtrack to a rapidly changing America, a nation caught between the idealism of the 60s and the exhaustion of the 70s. And yet, the deeper the harmonies became, the more unstable their foundation grew. The public never saw the tension, the resentment, the ego clashes, or the addiction that slowly metastasized through the group until everything came undone. As we revisit their story, you may find memories resurfacing. Moments when one of their songs played during a road trip or drifted through a summer evening, long before you knew what the men behind those voices were going through. If Three Dog Night was ever part of your youth, take a moment to tap the like button because you're about to learn what really happened behind the hits that defined an era. Los Angeles in 1967 was a city boiling over with experimentation. Psychedelia drifted through the Sunset Strip. Folk singers fought for space in crowded coffee houses. Every week, another group arrived convinced they were about to change music forever. But while most bands competed to outdo one another with wilder guitar solos or heavier amplification, a soft-spoken Irish-American vocalist named Danny Hutton was quietly developing a vision that broke every rule of the rock era. He believed a band did not need one charismatic frontman to dominate the spotlight. Instead, it could feature three equal lead singers sharing the stage, trading lines, blending tones, and rotating through songs with the precision of a perfectly engineered machine. It was a radical idea in a decade obsessed with singular stars, and yet Hutton believed it could work because he knew exactly who he wanted to recruit. Corey Wells brought grit. Raised in the tough neighborhoods of Buffalo before forging his way through the Chicago club circuit, he carried the raw power of a blues shouter who understood struggle and survival. His voice could shake walls, but it could also land with a tenderness that made a crowd feel understood. Chuck Negron came from New York, a tall athlete with a 4-octave range, capable of floating through a delicate melody one moment and unleashing a volcanic roar the next. His voice was unpredictable in all the best ways. Hutton instinctively recognized that these contrasting tones, when fused together, could produce something no other band in America possessed. The backing musicians completed the equation. Keyboardist Jimmy Greenspoon added color and texture. Bassist Joe Shermy anchored the group with a steady pulse. Guitarist Michael Alsup supplied the versatile playing needed to shift between genres. Drummer Floyd Sneed held it all together with a rhythmic confidence that allowed the vocalist to soar. 7 men, each with a specific role, each with a specific sound. When they played together for the first time, something clicked immediately, and everyone in the room knew it. But even in this early moment of promise, small fractures appeared, subtle glances, quiet disagreements, hints that three powerful singers might not share the spotlight as willingly as Hutton hoped. Before the band even had a name, they had an identity. They were a vocal powerhouse built for range and adaptability. What they lacked was a unifying concept, a symbol that could express who they were and what they wanted to represent. That answer came from Hutton's girlfriend, actress June Fairchild, whose imagination had been captured by an article about Indigenous Australians. The story described bitter winter nights in the outback and the way locals judged temperature by how many dogs they needed to sleep beside to survive the cold. A 3-dog night meant the harshest conditions imaginable, nights when only 3 warm bodies could keep a person alive. It was a metaphor so vivid and so unexpected that Hutton instantly knew it was perfect. 3 voices, 3 sources of warmth, 3 men relying on one another to create something strong enough to survive the cold realities of the music business. The name symbolized unity, necessity, and shared purpose. But, like many symbolic choices in rock history, its meaning would twist over time. A name born from the idea of huddling together eventually became an emblem of a group tearing itself apart. Even as the musicians rehearsed, a quiet tension was already simmering beneath the surface. Harmony came easily in the music itself. Personality harmony did not. Wells possessed a hard, disciplined attitude shaped by years of grinding through the Midwest circuit. Negron radiated charisma, but carried a volatility that could erupt without warning. Hutton, who had dreamed up the group, sometimes struggled to maintain his authority among 2 other natural frontmen. 3 equals sharing one spotlight might have sounded noble in theory, but in practice, it created a competitive dynamic that even the band's earliest supporters sensed. Still, pure talent pushed everything forward. In early rehearsals, they could jump from gospel-tinged ballads to gritty blues to polished pop without losing intensity. Industry veterans who heard them knew immediately that the group's vocal blend was unlike anything on the radio. Dunhill Records sensed potential and signed them almost immediately. The label saw what many did not. The American public was ready for something new, something that combined the vocal strength of a soul group with the crossover appeal of rock and pop. 3-Dog Night had that hybrid magic. Their first major single, a haunting cover of Harry Nilsson's One, arrived in 1969. Chuck Negron delivered the lead vocal with an aching vulnerability that caught listeners off guard. One became a hit, climbing the charts through spring and peaking during the summer. Its moody melancholy resonated deeply across a country grappling with cultural tension, political unrest, and personal uncertainty. But the irony was inescapable. Here was a song about loneliness sung by 3 men expected to embody unity. Listeners heard a heartbreaking ballad. The band lived its warning. As One continued climbing, the rush of early fame began reshaping the group's world. Radio programmers championed them. Television producers booked them. Teenagers bought tickets in droves just to hear those 3 voices collide. The success felt instant, but it was earned through relentless practice and perfect chemistry. With their career just beginning, the dream felt unstoppable. Yet even in their earliest victories, the pressures forming around them, competition for leads, clashing temperaments, and the relentless expectations of the industry were already foreshadowing the internal conflicts that would eventually swallow everything they built. And if you're enjoying this deep dive into their origins, consider subscribing so you don't miss the next chapter of how success and tragedy collided in the story of 3-Dog Night. The rise of 3-Dog Night was unlike anything in American music at the time. Once One entered the national conversation, the band transformed from a promising experiment into a trusted radio force. Their harmonies became instantly recognizable. Their voices blended so perfectly that audiences felt comfort in every note. And with success came momentum, the kind that builds faster than any group can prepare for. Their follow-up hits arrived rapidly, each one demonstrating a different shade of their vocal palette. Easy to Be Hard, drawn from the musical Hair, delivered social commentary with a sincerity that felt rare in the late 60s. Corey Wells carried the lead with a controlled urgency that gave the song weight. It quickly climbed the charts. Then came Eli's Coming, a dynamic Laura Nyro composition powered by dramatic tension. The band's interpretation made it feel both ominous and irresistible. Audiences were learning that Three Dog Night could take almost any song, reshape it, and turn it into something unforgettable. For many listeners, the band represented the best parts of American pop and soul. Their songs reflected the mood of a nation wrestling with change. The Vietnam War still loomed. Social upheaval touched every region. And while music often became a form of escape, Three Dog Night provided something deeper. They offered emotional transparency. Their voices delivered joy one moment and unease the next, mirroring the country's complexity. By 1970, they had become one of the most reliable hit-making acts in the world. Their schedules filled with concerts, television appearances, and recording sessions. They performed on major variety shows watched by millions, appearing polished, cheerful, and unified. To the outside world, they seemed unstoppable. But the band was already working under immense pressure. The industry expected them to deliver a new hit every few months. Their label pushed them to stay visible, stay active, and stay ahead of competitors. The expectation was not just success, it was dominance. Mama Told Me delivered that dominance. Written by Randy Newman and transformed with a gritty swagger, the song became their first #1 hit. Corey Wells unleashed a performance that felt unhinged, yet controlled, walking the line between humor and chaos. The band's arrangement tightened the song into something explosive. And when the newly launched American Top 40 premiered on a July weekend, Casey Kasem opened the very first broadcast with Mama Told Me. For millions of listeners, Three Dog Night became the first voice of a show that would shape American pop culture for decades. Their next era-defining moment arrived with Joy to the World. It was goofy, whimsical, and undeniably catchy. Chuck Negron's soaring performance turned a playful lyric into a celebration. The nation, weary from political tension and social turmoil, embraced the song's simplicity. It offered pure relief. When it reached the top of the charts, it stayed there, refusing to be replaced. For weeks, radios everywhere echoed the joyful chorus. People sang it in cars, at school events, in living rooms, and at parties. It felt like the musical equivalent of a deep breath. At this point, Three Dog Night operated with the efficiency of a well-oiled machine. Their three vocalists each brought a distinct strength. Wells delivered grit and control. Negron brought the emotional explosion. Hutton provided the smooth, warm tones that grounded the group. Their musicians were equally dependable, capable of shifting genres with ease. As new songs emerged from writers across the country, publishers eagerly sent material to Three Dog Night first. The band's reputation for reshaping compositions into hits made them a top priority. But beneath the success, something quieter was happening. The band did not write their own hits, and while audiences didn't care, the members sometimes did. They were interpreters rather than creators. For Hutton, the process of finding songs became a consuming obsession. For Wells and Negron, The inability to fully shape their own artistic direction occasionally stung. The label cared only about results. The machine demanded momentum, and every member felt the constant expectation to outperform their last success. Still, the victories kept coming. Old-fashioned love song charmed listeners. Black and White carried a message rooted in civil rights. Shambala invited audiences into a spiritual escape. Each recording reinforced their identity as America's premier vocal group. Their concerts swelled with energy as fans arrived eager to hear a stream of recognizable hits. The band's popularity cut across age groups, radio formats, and regions. Their appeal was universal, yet the pace was grueling. Albums were rushed. Tours stretched into long, exhausting runs. The members rarely had time to recover before being pushed into new projects. In public, they joked with interviewers, smiling as though nothing troubled them. But privately, they began feeling the weight of expectation. Negron, in particular, struggled with the pressure and found temporary relief in the growing drug culture that surrounded the industry. As the early 70s progressed, the atmosphere within the band quietly shifted. The three vocalists still delivered stunning performances, but rehearsals grew tense. Discussions about who would sing lead on certain songs occasionally led to conflict. The exhaustion from constant touring made small disagreements feel larger. Success had created both opportunity and vulnerability. The band stood at the top of the industry, yet their internal foundation was beginning to crack. Still, for fans who grew up during this era, Three Dog Night provided something deeply meaningful. Their music carried memories of summer freedom, teenage dances, and late-night drives. If you were part of that generation, share the song that shaped your youth in the comments, because your memories reveal just how much their music once meant. Their ascent seemed limitless. Their momentum felt endless. But the pressure building behind the curtain was preparing to explode. And as the next chapter began, the warning signs that had quietly followed them from the start finally demanded attention. The collapse of Three Dog Night didn't happen in a flash. It unfolded slowly, quietly, and then all at once. The pressure that had simmered beneath the surface for years finally collided with the growing reality of Chuck Negron's addiction. What began as casual experimentation during the band's early touring years soon spiraled into dependency, and by 1974, Negron's life had become a dangerous cycle that consumed everything around him. Heroin had already begun seeping into the band's world, but Negron's appetite for escape was deeper than anyone understood. He later admitted that the loneliness of fame, the expectation to deliver flawless performances, and the relentless demands of the industry left him searching for relief anywhere he could find it. Heroin offered a stillness he could not create on his own. But the stillness came with a devastating cost. As the band continued touring, Negron's drug use escalated rapidly. What he once justified as a temporary distraction soon became a necessity. He began missing rehearsals, arriving late to sound checks, and withdrawing from conversations. His voice, once one of the most powerful instruments in American pop music, grew inconsistent. Some nights he delivered electrifying performances. Other nights he could barely stay steady on stage. The duality frightened his bandmates, but they were unsure how to confront something that seemed to grow stronger each week. The addiction was expensive. Negron later revealed that at the peak of his dependency, he burned through nearly $20,000 a week just to maintain his habit. That amount is staggering in any era, but in the 70s, it was catastrophic. The band was generating enormous revenue, but Negron's share was disappearing faster than he could earn it. Money that should have secured his future evaporated into a haze of needles and despair. His financial life collapsed long before the band did. By mid-70s, Negron's appearance began changing. His once athletic frame shrank. His face grew gaunt. His energy drained. Those closest to him watched a slow deterioration that seemed impossible to stop. When the band traveled, he became unpredictable. Some mornings he woke up ready to work. Others he remained locked in his hotel room, unreachable. The tension within the group thickened. Then came the breaking point. In the summer of 1975, British newspapers published reports of Negron's arrest for cocaine possession in Kentucky. The incident shocked fans, but the band was not surprised. They had seen the decline firsthand. For Wells and Hutton, the arrest crystallized what they already feared. Negron was losing control, and the band's future was tied to his unraveling. Touring became a logistical nightmare. Instead of focusing on music, managers now focused on preventing conflict. The three singers could no longer be trusted in close proximity. Arguments erupted backstage. Silent resentment hardened into outright hostility. To avoid confrontation, tour personnel designed elaborate systems that kept the vocalists apart. Hotels became divided territories. If the venue had only one elevator, one singer was required to stay on the ground floor to prevent accidental encounters. If two elevators were available, each man was assigned his own. This wasn't superstition, it was necessity. The tension had reached a point where one wrong encounter could derail the entire night. Think about that image. Three voices that once blended into some of the smoothest harmonies ever recorded now avoiding each other like adversaries. Three men who once shared microphones now unable to share the same enclosed space. The irony was crushing. Their name came from the idea of huddling together for warmth during the coldest nights. Now they were colder than ever and refusing even to breathe the same air. The band kept performing, but the momentum that once seemed unstoppable began slipping. Their 1974 hit, "The Show Must Go On," carried a painful truth. The show really did have to go on, even as everything behind the curtain was falling apart. Audiences still turned out in large numbers, but the magic on stage began fraying. The connection among the singers weakened. They were still professionals, still capable of delivering strong performances, but the soul had dimmed. The band's final stretch was marked by exhaustion, fear, and resentment. The musicians were drained. Wells and Hutton no longer trusted Negron. Negron no longer trusted himself, and the entire structure that had lifted them to fame trembled under the weight of addiction and disillusionment. The turning point arrived in 1976 at the Greek Theater in Los Angeles. It was supposed to be a triumphant summer performance, the kind of show that reminded audiences why Three Dog Night once dominated American radio. But when the night arrived, only Chuck Negron showed up. Wells and Hutton had reached their breaking point. They refused to share that stage with him. In their place, substitute vocalists, strangers to the band, stood under the lights, attempting to fill roles no one else could truly fill. The moment was surreal. Negron stepped onto the stage expecting the familiar camaraderie of 7 years. Instead, he faced an audience without the two voices that had defined their harmonies. The crowd didn't immediately understand what was happening, but Negron did, and later he admitted that the emptiness of that night was one of the most devastating experiences of his life. The performance symbolized what everyone already knew. Three Dog Night was over. The dream that began in a Los Angeles rehearsal room had collapsed in full view. When Wells and Hutton moved forward, they did so without Negron. They could no longer carry the weight of his addiction. And although the breakup wasn't publicized as a dramatic explosion, the emotional rupture was final. Years later, Negron recalled that the separation was inevitable. The work was no longer getting done. The trust was gone. And despite moments of deep regret, reconciliation would never come. The damage was irreversible. If this breakdown of events is hitting your memory of the band harder than expected, take a moment to leave a comment with the song that defined your Three Dog Night era. Your perspective adds depth to the story and keeps their music alive for new listeners discovering their history. The end of Three Dog Night in 1976 did not bring peace. If anything, it opened a new era of personal battles, financial struggle, and emotional distance that lasted decades. The collapse of the band was only the beginning of a much longer and more painful unraveling. And for each member, the years that followed revealed a different version of loss. Danny Hutton and Corey Wells moved quickly to salvage what they could. Their careers depended on the band's name, and they knew audiences still loved the music. By 1981, they reformed Three Dog Night with a shifting lineup of backing musicians. The revival was never meant to replicate the original chemistry. It was a lifeline, an attempt to preserve their livelihoods and maintain the connection with fans who still cherish the songs. Chuck Negron had no such stability. His life after the breakup descended into darkness more severe than any fan imagined. Without the structure of the band, his addiction deepened. He spent the late 70s and early 80s in freefall, drifting through the streets of Los Angeles as the money vanished. The $20,000 habits, the constant withdrawals, and the search for one more high consumed every part of his world. He burned through savings, royalties, and pensions. He sold possessions. He pawned anything he could find. By the early 90s, Negron was homeless. He lived in abandoned buildings, couch-surfed when possible, and sometimes remained missing for weeks. His weight dropped so low that friends doubted he would survive. His body and voice, once powerful enough to lift songs into the stratosphere, had deteriorated into something unrecognizable. But the most heartbreaking part was the number of times he tried to escape the addiction. Negron entered rehabilitation programs over and over again, never giving up hope even when the odds seemed impossible. 37 attempts came and went. 37 failures that might have ended another person's life entirely. And then, finally, in 1991, he succeeded. After nearly 2 decades of destruction, he found sobriety and held on to it. His recovery became a story of endurance. He published a memoir that exposed the harshest realities of his past. In that book, he described the psychological weight of his addiction, the shame of what he put the band through, and the emotional scars that still defined his life. Fans who had only known the joyous voice from Joy to the World were stunned. The contrast between the public persona and the private torment revealed just how deep the fracture had been. Meanwhile, Hutton and Wells continued touring under the band's name. They moved through casinos, state fairs, and theaters where nostalgia thrived. Their audiences were filled with people who had grown up with Three Dog Night, people who still remembered hearing the band during high school dances, summer nights, and long drives with the radio on. But even as the music lived on stage, the emotional connection among the singers remained severed. Negron briefly rejoined the group during the early 80s, but his sobriety was fragile and short-lived. The reunion ended quickly. The trust had been damaged beyond repair, and Wells and Hutton could not risk losing momentum again. By 1985, Negron was permanently removed from the lineup. And even after he achieved lasting sobriety, years later, he was never invited back. Fans often wondered why reconciliation never occurred. The explanation went deeper than old grudges. Wells and Hutton had carried the band through years of chaos. navigating late arrivals, missed rehearsals, and unpredictable behavior that threatened their livelihoods. The wounds were deep. Decades later, Negron revealed in interviews that when he occasionally crossed paths with Hutton in Los Angeles, Hutton avoided him. He didn't just walk away. According to Negron, he sometimes ran as though he feared confrontation. The emotional distance had grown that severe. Time continued to carve the band's history. Losses mounted. Joe Shermy passed away in 2002. Jimmy Greenspoon followed in 2015. Then, in October of that same year, Corey Wells died, leaving Danny Hutton as the only original member still performing under the Three Dog Night name. Each death closed another chapter of the group's story, further reducing the chances of any true reconciliation among the surviving members. Despite the personal losses and fractured relationships, the music endured. Their catalog aged differently than critics predicted. Songs once dismissed as polished pop became staples of classic rock radio. Younger generations rediscovered their hits through film and television. Joy to the World became iconic all over again when it appeared during the ping pong scenes in Forrest Gump, introducing the band to millions who weren't alive during their prime. As nostalgia deepened, fans found themselves revisiting the band's long list of hits. 21 consecutive top 40 singles, 3 number-one records, and multiple songs that became part of American cultural history. Their harmonies remained unmatched, their interpretations still stood strong, and their influence stretched further than critics once acknowledged. For many fans, the legacy of Three Dog Night represented more than chart success. It represented memories. It represented a time when music was communal and radio felt like a shared language. And for those who had grown up hearing the band on summer drives or blasting through transistor radios, these memories became a permanent part of their lives. Yet, the human story behind the music complicates the nostalgia. The unity symbolized by the band's name masked years of conflict. The joy in their songs contrasted sharply with the sadness behind the scenes. Their harmonies suggested closeness, but their reality exposed the fragility of brotherhood. And even though redemption arrived for Negron through sobriety and a successful solo career, forgiveness never followed. Still, their story offers an undeniable truth. Sometimes art survives, even when the artists cannot survive together. Sometimes music outlives the wounds that created it. And sometimes the songs that bring joy to millions come from men battling storms the world never sees. Three Dog Night's legacy is one of extraordinary success and extraordinary pain. They mastered the art of interpretation, turning overlooked compositions into cultural landmarks. But fame magnified their insecurities, their addictions, and their conflicts until the unity they once relied on shattered. Their name, once a symbol of survival through the coldest nights, became a reminder of how fragile those bonds truly were. As you think back on your own memories of Three Dog Night, the concerts you attended, the songs that shaped your youth, or the moments their music helped you through, take a moment to share your story in the comments. These songs meant something different to each generation, and your memory helps keep the legacy alive. And if you've enjoyed this journey into the rise, collapse, and lasting impact of America's greatest harmony band, consider subscribing for more deep dives into music's most unforgettable stories.